Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Garry Bourke, a lawyer. Welcome, Garry.
Thank you very much, Gavin.
A lawyer. Interesting. But you were a boat person first.
I was, yes. I was actually born in Singapore. My parents lived there for 3 years in the early 60s, and I like to see myself as a boat person because I came on an ocean liner to Australia, but not quite the difficulties of a normal boat person.
But touching on that, there's a compassion and interest towards those who have suffered, who've had to leave other lands.
There is. It's been with me a long time, actually. I'm not sure where it came from, but yeah, I do. I feel a heartfelt solidarity and compassion and empathy for those who have been refugees or had, as you say, difficult circumstances in other countries, and yeah, I've been really saddened by the mainstream response to those refugees in more recent times on both sides of politics.
Yes. Well, let's wind back. You were very young when you left Singapore. You spent some time in Sydney.
Yes. I came to Australia when I was 13 months old. My parents were from Queensland, actually, so I spent a couple of years in Brisbane and came down to Sydney when I was 4 years old and did my schooling in university in Sydney. And
your dad, other than being, let's say, a righteous man, had the profile of living next to Joe Baulch, or Baulch Joe.
Joe Baulch Peterson,
yes.
Yeah. He did, yeah. My father came from a farm in Kingaroy, and the Baulch Petersons were on an adjoining farm. My father didn't know him well, but certainly knew the family.
So you see, at a young age, there's a lot of stuff going on here. All right, so finally you find yourself down in Melbourne.
Yes, I first came to Melbourne actually in 1998 for 2 years, and that was when I was a lawyer and worked in chartered accounting firms, which I did for 10 years, and then I had an academic career at the University of New South Wales as a senior law lecturer, and came down to Melbourne for 2 years working for what was Eric Ristrom's Taxpayers Association, which became Taxpayers Australia. Yes. But I think the return to Melbourne was 18 months ago, which I think is what you're referring to.
Yes. All right, so during your formative years, you read what interested you?
I was an avid reader, actually, and I remember that I read the Children's Illustrated Bible from cover to cover, but I read everything that was within reach. I read a lot of, I wouldn't say they were formative, but I read a lot of Enid Blyton stories.
Very informative.
So they were enjoyable as a young kid, but formatively, I guess, I think probably more my family and my education, which was by the Jesuit Order of Priests within the Catholic Church for 10 years. I think that's probably been more formative. But more recent years, I've been really interested in writers like C.S. Lewis and his story, which has been made famous in Shadowlands, of course. Yes.
Now, you evidently resemble quite a hero of mine, G.K. Chesterton. Is that true, or am I just making this up?
Well, I don't think I'm the one to judge that, but a good friend of mine who is the head of a Catholic charismatic order has reliably informed me that I resemble G.K. Chesterton, and I'd like to think not just internally, but also externally.
Well, he's certainly influenced me. I've read a little bit, and I lost a son-in-law to a tragic accident on the bay, and I used art as my therapy, and that kind of woke a few neurons and did some healing. And G.K. Chesterton was very deeply concerned about the mystery of life and pain and suffering.
Yes.
What about pain and suffering in your life?
Well, there certainly has been some, but I mentioned to you before we were on air that I've been quite interested in the biblical story of the Book of Job for a long time, and I could never claim that my pain and suffering with anything like that of our biblical hero Job. But yes, I have had some. I've, I guess more at school. I was bullied, and that's had long-standing effects on me. You know, my parents were great parents, but they weren't perfect, as none of us are. So I think there's been some issues that have come out of that in terms of probably a little bit prone to emotional dependency. And as someone said to me quite wisely, you know, at times I've probably looked to others to fill that which only God can fill. So that's been a journey of wisdom for me to realise that and appreciate that and to try and change.
Yes. And I think another comment that would apply to life is but by the grace of God goes me, I, myself.
Yes. That's a comment that I really love. It really resonates with me. It has for a long time, because I think it really it really sums up the fact that we can never fully put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and much as we try to be compassionate and empathic and to be there for that person in their suffering, we can never understand their perspective fully, and that's, I think, partly what the Book of Job is about.
Yes, yes. What were some of the things in the Book of Job that quite got your attention?
Well, there's a lot really, Gavin, but I guess one of the things that showed how to be with someone and empathise fully with someone, and then how to not do that, is actually characterised by the people who are known as Job's friends, and there were 3 of them. And one of the things that's quite often forgotten, and I'd forgotten it myself until I reread Job recently, is that when they first came to Job and saw him sitting with sores all over his body in an ash heap, having lost all his children, having lost all his possessions, and he was a very rich man, and he was unrecognisable to them, the experience was so beyond words that they just sat with him for a week. And they said nothing, they just sat with him for a week. And that really spoke to me, because there's many times when the suffering of others is beyond words. And I think that's a message from the Book of Job as well, that much as Job challenged God and saw him as unjust in what he went through, I think ultimately he realised that God is beyond words, and there's a mystery about God and there's a mystery about suffering that is beyond words.
Well, Garry, we won't be sitting with you for a week, but another 14 and a half minutes. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Garry Bourke, a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. You're a reformed lawyer, you were saying?
Yes, I jokingly refer to myself in that way, because I think of the stereotype of people have as lawyers as perhaps akin to tax collectors and sinners from the New Testament. Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, you're forgiven.
Thank you.
Right, absolution is given.
It's great to know, it's reassuring.
Yes. Now, we were talking about sitting with someone in their suffering. In other words, what can we say? In fact, it's the time when words are in short supply. Your mum had dementia for 10 years, so that was a kind of a sitting, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was, and it was a painful sitting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that perhaps we as a general public need to learn, that we do need to sit with people, and it can make a difference sitting with them, even if they can't remember in 5 minutes' time that you have sat with them. My wife, Robin, is a nurse, and she's been working as a personal care attendant with women who are trying to stay in the community rather than go into nursing homes. And that's one of the things that she has had to, I guess, come to grips with, is that presence with someone is valuable, even if that person has no recollection that you've been with them, because the fact is you have been with them and you've made a difference to them. The memory it's comforting, but when it's not there, it doesn't invalidate the presence.
Yes. I think there's a thing called the mind of Christ. My mother-in-law had dementia, didn't know us, but if we read a piece of scripture or a favourite hymn, she could repeat it word for word. She would sing along as if she was 20 years younger.
Yeah.
Interesting what's taking place. We don't know. It's a mystery, isn't it?
It is a mystery. It is a mystery. You know, I think we can explain it partially in scientific terms by saying, and I understand that people with dementia often do remember. They have their long-term memories a lot better than their short-term memories, so we can partially explain it. But ultimately, it is a mystery, and I mean, the mystery of God is something that the modern world doesn't really want to entertain. The modern world wants to make God cut and dried and present him or her in black and white terms, and God defies that. God defies really being explained in human terms. Because by definition, God is beyond our ability to explain God. And I know that one of the saints and one of the early apostles said at the end of their life that everything that they've ever said about God is just straw compared to the reality of God. Yes. So God will always be more mysterious than any enlightened human expression of what he might be or what or how he looks upon us.
Yes. And you know, we aren't gods. We may appear to be, but who of us has a great control of our own lives and our own destiny?
Well, that's true. I mean, it is getting back to the Book of Job. It's one of the things that the tension in the Book of Job is God's will for our life and our own free will, and the two have an interplay together.
Yes. You
know, some of our Christian brethren would say that there is predestination, that God has predetermined what we will do in our life. I don't take that view, as I see it as inconsistent with free will. So that I think it's difficult for our human mind to grasp it, just because God has the capacity, because he is omniscient, he knows all things, that he of course knows every one of our decisions throughout our life. He knows how we will exercise our free will, but I don't believe that he predetermines the way that we exercise that free will.
Yes, the predetermined moment seems to be in what's been predetermined in Christ. Okay, the Redeemer, the sufferer,
yes,
the one able to bear our fallen nature,
yes,
our sinful condition.
Yes, that's true. That's true. You know, you said before that we're not gods. It's interesting that, to paraphrase St. Paul, he didn't say that we were gods, but he said that we've become like gods, because when God took human flesh and became human, in the process of, we were in a sense divinized.
Yes.
But that's a subtle distinction. I'm certainly not saying that we are gods, no. but that that humanity was divinized, if you like, was given a sacredness as a result of, and restored the sacredness that humanity was given at the beginning of creation.
Yes. Now that sacredness moves into the sanctity of life. If I am valuable in an image, there's elements of me that can reflect a little of who God is and what his intention for us was. It comes out in how we handle life, does it not? Absolutely.
Yeah, you're alluding there to Genesis chapter 1, I believe, where Genesis says that we were made in the image and likeness of God, male and female, he made us. So we were made in the image and likeness of God. There was a fall, however we understand it, whether we understand it literally, according to the story of Adam and Eve, and then that, in a sense, blurred our image. We didn't reflect God in the same way as we did when we were first made. But Christ, in coming in this earth, as St. John said, God the Father loved the world so much that he gave us his only Son to come into the world. And through that, humanity's original image has been restored, that we again reflect the image and likeness of God, and it does give all humanity, at whatever stage of life, whether it's in the womb or a person right at the end of their life suffering from cancer or whatever it may be, suffering from dementia, that person has that same sacredness and dignity that we all share as humanity.
Yes. Well, on that high note, you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Garry Bourke, a lawyer, well, not just a lawyer, a reform lawyer, in fact, not even a reform lawyer, a person who's very compassionate and very concerned about the suffering individual. You've had a career change. What is it?
Yes. About 11 years ago, actually, I ended my chronic disillusionment within law, which I managed to defer a change by becoming an academic, but ultimately I had foreseen actually that if that didn't bring me the satisfaction of real fulfillment and feeling like I was acting in what God had in mind for my life, then I would leave law altogether, which is what I did.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the pathway now, what does that look like? Take us on this journey.
Well, it started actually with doing training in pastoral care, in hospital chaplaincy or pastoral care departments, and those courses are called clinical pastoral education courses or CPE courses, and I did 2 of those at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney in Darlinghurst, and also at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, and then became the first Catholic lay chaplain at Nepean Hospital on the western outskirts of Sydney in 2005. So since then I've worked in pastoral care in a variety of modes, if you like, or variety of institutions, and that's included working in, particularly with young people. I feel called to be with young people and a mentor of young people. And so I've worked in as a chaplain in government schools in Canberra. I've worked as a residential youth worker on a 24-hour roster with kids who are compelled by their family circumstances to live in out-of-home care. Mm-hmm. And I came to Melbourne a year and a half ago to work as a chaplain in 2 youth justice centres with younger kids from, it could have been as young as 10, unfortunately, but actually the youngest was 13, and that's at Parkville in Melbourne. And then I also worked simultaneously in a separate role as a chaplain at the Youth Justice Centre at Malmesbury, yes, which is with young people from 18 to 24. Yes. And the idea of that, which is great actually, is it's a system that's parallel to the adult prison system, and it's meant to be working with people who are particularly vulnerable but able to be rehabilitated. And there is an emphasis on education and other forms of rehabilitation rather than punishing people and throwing away the key.
Yes, yes.
So
here's yourself on this pathway. Your wife has nursing hospital experience. Now, you're deciding to care for particular needy kids. Tell us about that story.
It's difficult to know where to start, Gavin, but I guess I've always felt, we talked before about how I've had this compassion in me, this real sense of strong sense of injustice and wanting to change situations where people are in difficult circumstances, and kids who have been abused or in other difficult circumstances of, totally innocent. And getting back to our theme of Book of Job, the suffering of the righteous, these kids have not deserved to be put through what they've been through. So I've wanted to make a difference to their lives, whether that be as a mentor, as someone to walk with them, or in more recent times, my wife and I have looked at becoming, working in permanent care or working in foster care with kids who've come from very difficult family backgrounds as well.
Yes. And how far along that road are you?
Well, in terms of working with kids in difficult circumstances, I guess I've been doing that for probably the last 10 years or so. But in terms of actually parenting, my wife and I have done training in permanent care and also in foster care, and so we're ready to start that soon.
Good. Now, what did you learn from these teenagers with difficulties?
That's a really hard question to answer. I guess I learnt that about the vulnerability of young people, and I guess that we can apply that generally to humanity. We're quite vulnerable, but we're particularly vulnerable to the experiences we have as a young person. And I think you, in your own experience, would have found that we're shaped to a large extent by our childhoods, and whether they be positive or negative. But as we've said before, no one's perfect and no parents are perfect. So we all carry to some extent the scars of our upbringing, and I think that young people are probably right in the heart of that. And but I guess a lot of work's been done in research in looking at the fact that it's much better to try to prevent rather than to cure. So by being at the formative stage of young people, hopefully we can prevent that damage happening, so that we're not dealing with as broken individuals as adults.
Yes.
So I guess I just learned that there's hope, that you can make a difference, even quite insignificant moments to you can be quite significant to a young person. I have had some feedback some years later that I did manage to make a difference.
Yes. Now the word redemption is an important word mixed in with this hope. Why is that such a strong but meaningful word?
Well, I think it comes back to one of the issues that's been underlying our discussion so far, which is about suffering, and that fact that suffering can have a point, that it's not just something to be avoided at all cost, whether that's by ending life prematurely or just numbing people to what they're going through. I think so. We talk about a concept of redemptive suffering, but Christ is the Redeemer, as you said earlier, and by coming into this world, notwithstanding that he was the Son of God, that he emptied himself, as St. Paul said, became like us in all things but sin, and by doing that, he actually redeemed our human condition, which came about as a result of the fall. So there is hope in all of this. The story of Job doesn't seem to have a lot of hope, but there is hope in that as well, because ultimately Job didn't seem to be persuaded by the words of the friends, the so-called friends, but what he was persuaded by was the fact that God made himself known to him, and it was the presence of God, not the words that God said, because God apparently didn't seem to address the issues that God raised with him, but the fact that God could, in his presence, or made himself known to Job, and in a way that just made the words meaningless and made him realise that ultimately human words are good, but they have their limit.
Yes. So we can finish on the high note that there's hope and redemption, even if we're suffering. It's morning, it's yet to come with grace and mercy and love.
Absolutely.
You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.